Welcome back to another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct, we just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Jack, as always, joined by my brother Lucas, and this week we are doing our second part of our deep dive into personal knowledge. If you want to know a little bit about what we did last week, we basically just sort of did a look into why in God's name would we be spending however many weeks we're going to be doing this for on this topic. We sort of gave you the why, the what, and then where we're going to be going, at least as far as we have planned out for now. And I guess for a little bit of a breakdown about what we're going to be doing this week and what we're doing now, I'm going to throw it over to you.
All right. Well, I think we did a good job last week of introducing what we really mean by personal knowledge management. I think this is not really a term that is like well established, but I think it's recognizable. I think people kind of get the gist of it. We started this whole idea with this notion of note taking, but it grew for us as we were exploring what actually mattered, why we cared about note taking in particular, and it evolved into this notion of knowledge management. And in order to get a better handle on what that really means, we wanted to take a step back and think about the history of knowledge management through the the ages, through all of human history. And in doing this, we were able to identify a few different models that help us think a little bit more about the why, the what, and the how of personal knowledge management. What is it for? Why why does it matter? And how are we actually going to execute on whatever system we come up with? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's perfect, and I think the first part of that you said is this why, and I think that what we've come across here is a pretty interesting way to think about all these different types of information, sort of if you want to call it that, all of these different things which we take in across a day's work. And I thought it was really cool because it started with this sort of base that this sort of things which you take in and you ingest is all some of it, at least the basis for it, is data, and just the fact that it's not really anything overcomplicated. A lot of these things sort of build on raw, facts and just, numbers, maybe even digits, or like, literally facts of that you hear. That's all where sort of this stuff begins. That's where the journey starts.
Yeah, I think this is fair. I'm just going to jump right to kind of this concept in general, which I've termed the insight ladder. And it like you say, it's built on this foundation. Like you can almost think of this as sort of a I don't know. I guess in my head, it's almost like an inverted pyramid, or like even you could think of it as a pyramid where you're building up on top of things. But like data is certainly the base of this whole thing, where this is your sensory perception. This is literally like what you are experiencing in the world. It is the like you say the raw facts and figures, so to speak. Whether it's literally like facts and figures, or more figuratively in the sense again of your senses, anything you touch or see or hear, whatever. All of this goes into what we perceive, and then from there you start to build up to on that. And I guess the difference is like, we're about to talk about like information, like turning data into information, and then turning information into knowledge, and finally knowledge into wisdom. And the kind of the middle steps are where I've focused for the majority of my life, like the distinction between information and knowledge. But I think what was interesting in this exploration was that I kind of wanted to see if there was one step further back, and making that distinction between data and information is pretty interesting to me. So whereas data is the raw facts and figures, you can say that information is data organized into meaningful patterns.
I definitely know that we've had the discussion about that differentiation between knowledge and information before, because it's really important to like have that differentiated in your head. And I mean the sort of fact that, not even fact, the idea that knowledge is, information processed and applied through understanding is definitely that distinction that we wanted to make. And then I remember when I was looking through this, I was like, I've definitely thought about this before, but yeah, the data in the wisdom piece, the step, like you said, back, and then wisdom, sort of, if you want to call it the step forward, the step beyond knowledge, I thought was really interesting because I've definitely talked about this role of wisdom before with people, and it's this sort of place that I think a lot of people want to get, and it's a very interesting thing because it's really basically like what you use. You call that an insight ladder. The wisdom is the insights that you gain. That's what's really the marvel of all of this sort of even knowledge management concept.
Yeah, exactly. I think the point for me is that you're climbing this ladder to get from literally your base perception all the way to your ultimate insights. Like, this is why I like the term insight ladder. It feels to me like you're always reaching towards insights. The reason I initially said, like, to sometimes when I visualize it I see like an inverted pyramid is because it feels like somehow things are getting filtered down from data and like distilled into information. Then you're trying to like pull out the core knowledge from that, and finally like there's probably the tip of that iceberg is like the insight you get. So that's sort of like why that image comes to my head. But it is, like, practically speaking, more of this ladder you're climbing. You're constantly trying to get closer and closer to the insight.
At the end of the day, it's really what you're striving towards. You really, because the insights are what aid you in decision making and being authentic and all of these things that we talk about all the time. Because without these sort of like crucial insights and lessons and all these things, then a lot of the time that you spend going throughout your life is sort of just spent in like a limbo phase trying to figure out where you want to go. But once you have these literally insights from the all the experiences that you have, you really start to be able to make a more informed decision and better yourself as a person.
That's definitely the why of personal knowledge management. Why do we even care? Why do we need to manage our information, our knowledge at all? It's, I think, ultimately to get to wisdom so that we can become more wise. I think for me, that is my motivating force. I'm doing all of this, I'm taking all the time to maintain notes and all this other stuff because ultimately I'm hoping that I will derive some wisdom from it. But the next question is, if that's the why, what is it still? What is knowledge management? Like, that's still, I think, a question that it feels like there's some intuitive answer, but I don't think that it has been properly defined.
Not at all, no, because again, it's sort of this like it's a term that's been thrown around, but I think you said that it's not really a mainstream term yet, and I think we're trying to sort of create our own definition for it because we can. Like in a very much so of a sense, we are going to try and come up with our own definition of knowledge management here, and I think this sort of idea that we have is a very very good way to talk about knowledge management in the way that we think about it.
Well, the acronym actually that we're about to introduce, it was actually fairly unintentional, but I actually really like what it comes out to. What we're going to talk about is the core of personal knowledge management. Core being capture, organize, retrieve, and enhance. So, walk us through what that actually means.
So, capturing is sort of this gathering of knowledge from all the different bits and bobs of your life. Like, maybe you like reading a book, or you had a conversation with somebody, or you like skinned your knee falling off of a skateboard. I don't even know. That's capturing your knowledge. Maybe you're taking a picture or whatever. That's all of these different things that you have going on in your life. You're gonna want a way to capture those things so you then organize. That's literally how are you gonna structure it? Are you gonna categorize it? Are you gonna use tags in something like Notion? Are you gonna, have notebooks with pages and tabs and all the stuff is color coordinated, stuff like that. Then there's retrieve. How are you gonna get it out? You want your information to be easy to find. You don't want it to get lost or be hard to find or not easily searchable. All of those things are things that you want. And then this last piece here of enhance, I think this is really one of the parts that I think is sort of not really talked about that often. It's this sort of continuous improvement and updates to your knowledge. These sort of, it's like you gotta get a new iOS system coming in every once in a while. And that's what you want to do with your notes. Your knowledge doesn't just stay the same, or at least I don't think it should stay the same. Having stagnant knowledge just seems like it eventually is going to become outdated and sort of stale. You really want to be able to keep things up to date and relevant and accurate to who you are now and even what the information has to tell you and all of those things. And I think that's essentially what that core process is.
Yeah, I love that you're emphasizing that last piece, because enhance was sort of the last aspect of this that we really thought about. And if you look at again that distinction between knowledge and wisdom, wisdom we said was the insight gained from knowledge and experience. And I think that the important part here is that the wisdom is how you are making decisions, and it's the piece that is active. It's the piece where you're actually trying to put that knowledge into practice so that you can actually get value from it. And the point that I'm making there is that the same knowledge won't have the same applicability forever. Depending on what you're trying to do, the context you're in, that the wisdom you derive from that knowledge might be different. So this is the enhance aspect to me, is the part where it's really like, this is what helps you get from knowledge to wisdom. The capture is how we get from data to information. Organize is sort of how we get from information to knowledge. And I think enhance is how we get from knowledge to wisdom. Retrieval is obviously the aspect where like you want to be able to use that, but I don't think it's a transitionary step.
Yeah, it's very much so that more like application stage, which is very important, but I don't think it really is sort of a bridge between any of the two steps. I agree with you on that.
Or you could argue that like retrieval is that piece that allows you to figure out how you want to enhance. So like the tandem of retrieve and enhance is what gets you from knowledge to wisdom.
That's fair. I can see that actually. I think that's probably a good point.
So with that in mind, that's sort of the what of personal knowledge management. What does it actually mean? Well, it's this process. It's the process of capture, organize, retrieve, enhance, how you actually maintain your system over time. Everything is going to fit into one of those buckets. But that only describes the process as a kind of a static system. What I want to understand are the dynamics of that system, a little bit more of the how something operates. So the pieces here are not as clear. I think that what I tried to come up with are some foundational principles that can be applied, broadly speaking, to to the process, so that no matter what you're doing. And then I guess I should also mention, like, I wanted to think about knowledge management, like it's very different today than it ever has been, and I think we'll come to that shortly. But I wanted whatever these principles were to be applicable from the beginning of human history, from the beginning of needing to manage your knowledge. These shouldn't be principles that are just tied to what's possible in the digital age.
Yeah, they really are quite universal, and I think that's the beauty of them because as we've had all of this, I mean, I think the right way to put it is like evolution and advancements in this idea that we call knowledge management. Everything, these core values that everything is sort of built upon, have stayed basically the same. We've just had more tools unlocked. We have more potential to do more things with the knowledge that we have. It's not that anything is, you know, less important or less, whatever. They all are important, and it's really just what do we need to do and what are we capable of doing. And all of these principles still hold true. But really, at the core of what we want to use this for, it hasn't really changed that greatly from literally, like you said, the origins of it.
So I've got 7 of them. We can sort of dive as deep into these as we want, but obviously, like, I don't want this to turn into like a lecture kind of situation. So like, let me just run through the broad principles: simplicity, accessibility, adaptability, scalability, consistency, contextualization, and durability. So these
Yeah,
are the 7 dwarfs of personal knowledge management.
yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. They're very much. I mean, I think that's like pretty good. That's basically all it's gonna want to build upon. It should be easy to look at. It should be easy to find. It should be able to change and move with you. It should be able to get. It should be able to grow with you as you are. It should be sustainable. You're not going to want it to away. It should always be well informed upon you and the world around you, and you don't want to lose it. Now it might be for a data wipe from, I don't know, a couple thousand years ago. It might have been a tsunami or a natural disaster. But either way, I think that's basically sort of what we want to get out of these these knowledge management
Yeah,
systems.
that's a good summarization. I think the only I'm just gonna like we'll probably touch on these as we go, but I want to emphasize that first one for a second, simplicity. And I think that this is something that is overlooked. And I think a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people who are interested in this topic, that they're very proud of the complexity of their system, and I always look at it and I go, "This is." I think the word you used was sustainable, and I just like I don't see how anything could be sustainable when it's that complex. I think to make any of these pieces, and I guess this, I think this is the most applicable to all four of the parts of the core process. Your The process by which you capture information needs to be simple. How you organize it needs to be simple. How you retrieve it needs to be simple, and how you enhance it needs to be simple. If all of that isn't simple, you're not going to be able to do it effectively. It's just going to become too burdensome.
Yeah, absolutely. Just I love the phrase "keep it simple, stupid" because like that's the whole point. If you overcomplicate things, I don't know of any time when overcomplicating something and clouding stuff with useless information has actually made anything better. Like if you can make it simpler, you can make it easier to do. I don't know why it wouldn't help you.
So I think where we want to take this is we decided to look back through the whole history of knowledge management and get a sense for how it evolved over time. And this was sort of your idea, Jack. So I will let you kind of start us out with like help us understand timeline, like where are we going to start and what's sort of the trajectory we want to take.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the earliest things that we have here is sort of this idea of these oral traditions, telling stories, these myths, all of this stuff, these epics that you hear. They say stories get passed down through families. Of course, they change over time, but that's really one of the first ways that knowledge was stored. It was through these stories because there wasn't really much. I don't. There might not have been a way to write things down or keep track of things in a way that wouldn't, fade away or grain over time. That really was the first way to store knowledge in a system. The system being like a family tree that's going to get passed down over time.
Yeah, this is such an interesting idea, the idea, like oral tradition as a means of storage. I think that if you connect this back to those principles, that notion of durability is really one of the first pieces there. It's durable because it's passed through that family or through that whatever small society of people who are talking to each other and communicating their ideas. They're trying to contextualize information, I think, at this point, and storing that contextualized knowledge in the traditions of the stories that we tell is a good way to establish a baseline for storing knowledge, keeping that knowledge durable moving forward.
Well, absolutely. I think it you sort of just see that as time goes on, it starts to sort of become baked into the culture of whatever it may be. Like you said, maybe a small society or a family, but the sort of like repetition of all of these stories over and over and over. It sort of just becomes even a way just to say it almost becomes like a fact. It's not really even a story anymore. It kind of just it is what it is because you've heard it so many times. It is literally just it's ingrained into your mind. It's not going to go anywhere. You know the story inside and out. And that's really that like sort of consistency part of it. It was done so often that like there's no way you're going to forget it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you'd have literally rituals, like things that are done regularly, so that you're yeah, so you're getting that consistent flow of we tell these stories whatever every night around the fire. I don't know what it is, but the point is like you could have all kinds of rituals that might be established as part of the culture, and so that this shared knowledge becomes, like you said, ingrained into not just you but into your society. And this is an important period, I think, again, because it is storing it in our collective memory in people. And so it's not so easy. Like you need someone to be able to explain it to you. And I think that that brings us to the next phase of things where which is where you start actually being able to write things down so that you can theoretically pass knowledge through the ages, so that as long as these records existed, someone would be able to learn something from people of the past.
Yeah, you get a little bit more accuracy here. You see this sort of this piece where I mean, accuracy in the sense that the story doesn't change. You know, you don't get any sort of like gross exaggerations or something gets lost in translation, but you get something that is, it's always going to be the same. You can't change. It definitely was a way for you to also be able to spread the information a little bit because you can, copy down what you're writing and I don't know, sell it. I mean, that's what they did with the Bible, whatever. You can copy down people writing down the book over and over and selling it, giving it out, whatever, for a long bit. Even like, I mean, now in the modern day, written records are incredibly important. Research documents, papers, articles, whatever it may be. It's one of the easiest and most effective ways to distribute the information that you have. And I mean, of course, it also gave room for context on stories. Storytelling in itself is cool, but everybody's going to put their own twist on the tell, regardless of how ingrained it is into the conscience of. I'm sure if you were to look back on some catastrophic event like COVID, even so, just very recently, everyone's going to have their own sort of different story about it. Who lived in the house, regardless of what happened. Writing that stuff down, journaling it down, gives you a way to look at it that is just slightly different, and it's so interesting.
The pieces that stand out to me here are definitely accessibility. It's less about, because if you think about an oral tradition, like again, you need someone who has that knowledge already and can distribute it. But if you can write it down, you don't necessarily need that person there. The story can be passed more widely, so it's more accessible to more people. And then you called it accuracy. I struggle with that just because again, like just as much as someone could embellish a story in the way that they tell it to someone, they can embellish it in the way that they write it down. But I think what you're trying to get at is this notion of consistency, which is one of those principles that we talked about, as is accessibility. But consistency in this case meaning you can determine and compare different written accounts of something. You can start to have a little bit more clarity about the details because there is a detailed record that can be referenced. I think that's so. Yes, like we still have these notions of contextualization and durability from oral tradition, but now we've sort of added these notions of accessibility and consistency to the mix.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it. Exactly. Accuracy, you're very much so correct. What I was more so trying to get at is that consistency. But what I think now I want to start thinking about is how this information sort of became stored in different ways. And what I mean by this is I had said that when you have written records, it sort of allows you to start to have a way to distribute your knowledge, to put it out, to store it so it doesn't get lost maybe in memory or for whatever reason, is this sort of beginning of archives and libraries. And you see very early on the Tibetan library is one of the first large scale held places with a whole just bucket load of knowledge. I don't know, put it. And we still haven't translated I don't know, maybe it's like 10% of it, but there's so much knowledge in there that we haven't even taken in yet. But this gives you a sort of an easy way to make this knowledge like accessible. We've talked about accessibility a lot, but it made it super easy. You can go walk into a public library, pick up a book on almost anything, and learn about it. I mean, that's a revolution in how knowledge and learning sort of took place.
Dedicated spaces for knowledge gathering and retrieval. I guess this is actually where I wanted to take this is like if you think about it, once you get written, well, maybe there's a way to look at this in the broader context of again the overall process: capture, organize, retrieve, and enhance. Those first two stages are really about capturing the knowledge. Like we started with oral and written traditions, which once you go from oral to written, suddenly you have all these artifacts and you need a way to organize them. And that's sort of where you get these ideas of libraries and archives. You start to actually put them in places, centralized repositories where people can gain access to them. So you again are improving on accessibility and consistency. It's the next natural step from having now written artifacts, right?
Yeah, that's like a tremendously good point, actually, now that you talk about it like that. This sort of natural flow sort of represents itself. Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I had a wrong idea in a wrong idea episode. That was
The next stage I think is to start talking about the scalability of this stuff because again, while it was more accessible, like unless you lived in the area that had these libraries, like these great libraries, you wouldn't necessarily have the access. So while if you're local, accessibility is high, being more remote makes accessibility much more difficult. So I think these we tried to solve this problem with more scalable processes. In particular, I'm thinking of like the printing press and the print revolution in general, and more of standardization in the way that written materials were replicated and released.
Yeah, those were absolute game changers, like some of the most important turning points in the entire history of the world. Being able to mass produce this knowledge and make books and information super widely available was revolutionary. I mean, it'd be, it's hard for me to think about a world where knowledge isn't so abundant and ubiquitous. It feels so unfamiliar, but it like literally it just scaled all up so quickly, and now it's like sort of just it's toppled on top of itself like multiple times over. It's scaled and then scaled on top of what it was scaled upon, and then like you said, you saw standardization happen. It gave such an easy way to make things easy to look through. It really didn't mean, I think what I'm thinking about here is everybody could look through the knowledge in a similar way. It gave a way to provide context for the knowledge that you want to look at. It's like, oh, you're looking here, you should have context about it given these things. So people aren't trying to search through information in totally different context and not know what other people are looking through. It gave sort of a more literally a standardized way to look at the knowledge anyways.
That standardization aspect is certainly, I think, the key of this era. Like, well, scalability and is obviously like why this is important. But I think in order to make these things more scalable, you do have to sort of standardize them. And I think that's kind of the point. Is these things come in tandem; they come together. So certainly, this changed the game in terms of now we're accessible to so many more people. Now this knowledge is available and usable. And so, where do you kind of take this? Well, I guess the historical stage here is to start thinking about the rise of the scientific method, kind of the Enlightenment era is sort of, I guess, the best way to categorize it. And I think that this is where you bring in that last piece, Dopey, the Seven Dwarfs. No, I'm just this one is adaptability. This is where you start to get people, now that there are standardized versions of texts and people can converse about them more intentionally and start applying scientific means to these records. You start to get people asking different questions, changing the nature of the knowledge, presenting it in different ways, trying to figure out the most efficient ways to learn things. I think it's just, this is the point where you start to get people manipulating knowledge more intentionally.
This is true. It definitely seems to me like this is like it's interesting because my mind went to this is when they started to like enhance knowledge in a sense, like at the end of that core process that we talked about. This feels like sort of the time when people started to be able to like act upon, challenge, go through all of these processes to try and see what they could try and get from the knowledge. Like you said, I mean, this is like basically what you said, but yeah, I mean, it basically gave them a way to document their processes very like methodically, and it allowed for a lot of growth in science and academia because like once you started to see all of these like large scalable processes and easy ways to store this information starts to become a thing, you start to become a little more comfortable with this idea that okay, I can have these ideas and start to put them out there and maybe see them get substantiated and maybe see some of my work start to become more and more relevant. It just starts to open up the world to this like creative and scientific world.
That's the right sentiment for sure. I think this boom in scalability and adaptability enabled us to have a much richer corpus of knowledge that the whole society could draw on. And I guess that sort of brings us to the next stage, which is the digital revolution, starting to put this stuff onto machines. And I think that this marks the era of, we've now established kind of the form of the core process. Like you said, I think the that last stage sort of marked the first time we had gotten to the enhancement part of the process. We had been so focused up to this point on just capturing the knowledge, organizing it, figuring out better ways to make it accessible more to so that people could retrieve it, and then finally we're starting to think about how we can enhance that knowledge and really get the most wisdom out of it. So the digital age marks, in my mind, a focus now on refining these processes and making them simpler. I think, again, that was the first one of those seven principles that I even mentioned is, I think, the most widely applicable. But once you have the process in place, it's really time to start thinking about, how do we make this as easy as possible? How do we improve on each of these stages and make gains that are unprecedented? So with the digital revolution, suddenly you start having the ability to store massive amounts of data in a very small, well, in a small place, in relative to, if you think about, like, you could literally, even those giant mainframes in the early days of computers, like, you could put multiple libraries of information into those sorts of systems, and it just, the density of information is so much higher now. Then obviously, like, you're going to take that and start connecting computers together in bigger networks, which is going to make the accessibility skyrocket. And I think this is the importance of the internet and of digital storage systems, is that now essentially there's knowledge is ubiquitous. You can find anything you need, or maybe information is ubiquitous, and we can try to derive knowledge from it. There's some knowledge out there that is already been sort of synthesized for you, but again, we like to think about doing this for ourselves. So how can we find the information that we need? That process has become so much easier that now we get to focus on distilling that into useful knowledge and extracting insights to make us wiser.
Looking back on all of these, it's kind of hard to pick out one that might be the most important. I don't think you could say that one of these sort of big leaps forward is the most important, but this digital age certainly is the biggest leap that we've sort of taken up to today, and I think we're getting ready to take that next leap again soon. But I'll get to that sort of at the end of my whole whatever this rant's going to turn into here. But like, yeah, that transition from physical to digital data was giant. Like you said, the way that information was able to be stored in such a, like you said, relatively smaller area, and it became so much more dense. You didn't have to, go and look through a library and climb on a ladder and read the little, maybe is the Dewey Decimal System on the back of the book to try and pick out, and then, or go by the author's last name to try and figure out which book you wanted to get. There was none of that. It was essentially just like, okay, sit down at computer, search for data I want, then read data I want. It sped up that process so much, and then of course, as you're doing that, you can take notes on whatever separate piece of paper, and then eventually you were just able to take notes directly into the system. I mean, now more information, like basically all the world's information on our phone. You put that in your pocket. You've got a world of knowledge, quite literally, in your pocket. It's just crazy to think about. You could ask it any question, get almost any answer, and literally it just sits in your pocket. You pull it out and you have all the information sitting at your fingertips. It's probably could be the biggest step in managing knowledge that we've had to this point, which is sort of where I said this at the beginning. We're getting ready to take this next leap with AI, and that sort of takes us into what we've been thinking about with this deep dive. The next step forward is this AI integration, this sort of other intelligence that can help us better our knowledge systems. And it's such a crazy space. I mean, we just saw Apple, the next whatever it is, the I can't remember what the name of the
Their
event is, but
developer conference.
there you go, their developer conference. They did that, and we saw this sort of integration of AI into the new iOS system. That is new. It's revolutionary.
Yes, I think that where we are at this point is, again, this change has the potential to impact every aspect of the core process. But I think that the first place I would start is enhancement. I really feel like the value of these systems, maybe organize and enhance is where I really want to focus, because I think that these are the places that so far have required the most manual processes and the most like dedicated effort for humans to handle in the whole process. Like when you're managing your knowledge, I'm thinking about the mostly the organization and enhancement of it. Obviously, like capture is typically important, but once you get your kind of capture methods set up, you're not thinking about it too much. Once you're able to figure out your workflows of like how you access your information and how you use it, you're not thinking too much about retrieval. Sure, obviously you could find ways to improve those things, but I think the majority of my mental effort goes into organization and enhancement. And if we can get the AI to offload any of that stuff for us, and it doesn't have to be super complex AI, it's literally things like, because I guess I'll emphasize contextualization in terms of principles here. This is the revolution for me, is that it's now able to understand not just the words as data but as information. It now understands the context of how that knowledge is stored. It's not just raw bytes on a disk. Somehow now there is enough quote unquote intelligence to be able to do tagging and categorization, to be able to ask follow up questions, meaningful follow up questions that could provide value to you. All kinds of stuff here that starts to feel like a whole different approach to knowledge management that has been possible before. And I guess the only other aspect that I'll mention again is that I think AI is again this revolution in simplicity. So hopefully we're getting to the point where you don't have to be the kind of person who wants to learn about this stuff and think about this stuff deeply to be good at knowledge management. Hopefully AI is going to make that as easy and accessible as possible for everyone without them having to particularly focus on acquiring those skills. It should just be a natural part of the process, as with all of these other things before. Like, people, once you started to build libraries, people were like, oh, now I just have this thing that's available to me. But now, once you have AI assisted knowledge management, it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about how I organize all this stuff. It's just happening for me.
Yeah, I think you said something along the lines of it's a revolution in simplicity. I think that's almost like one of the most perfect ways I've heard this put. It's that it's again going to simplify this this revolution that we had. I mean, if you look back from the beginning, you you had you had the oral traditions, and then you were able to write them down. Then you wanted a way to keep track of all the the written records that you have, so then you put them in libraries, and then you wanted the way to distribute them, so you scaled it all out, and then everything sort of built on top of it. And now it's really happening again. You had this sort of added level of complexity and all of these different these pieces, and now it's really becoming simplified again. So of course my next logical thought would be, god knows what comes after AI. I don't even know. That's a total unknown, but I could only assume that eventually it would happen. But I think what's interesting about saying that is, I know literally one of the first things you said is you wanted to talk about enhancement, and I think that's the right way to think about it, because we don't want it to take over for us. We don't want it to do anything for us. We want it to make what we're doing better, because we want it to integrate with us, not overtake us. It's a tool for us to use, and it's so incredibly powerful, and it allows us to do so much that looking at it as a threat is it's just harmful. You need to look at it as a tool which you can use.
There's a lot to this for sure. And I think that you gave a good summary there of sort of how these things built on top of each other and how we've gotten to where we are. I think, yeah, trying to understand what the next step of this looks like is hard until we've really integrated these capabilities into society. Predicting anything at this point beyond a couple of years feels hopeless. But, to some extent, I would say I think what's happening is, again, is you're just going to see more and more focus on simplicity. Maybe again, okay, so if I had to guess, just because now you got me thinking about this, what I would say the next place to look for improvements is adaptability. And I do think that this comes into play with AI to some extent, but whatever that next phase is going to be much more about making it not just easy to access this information and to keep it safe and consistent over time, not just to have the contextualization, but to be able to adapt it to whatever our needs are. I don't know what that looks like, but if you had to ask me, like, what is we've the people going through and doing this after us, and when there is an eighth stage of this process, they're probably going to be like, oh yeah, it was adaptability that was the aspect, the principle that we really built on.
Interesting. I could see exactly why that makes sense. Like, exactly why. That's interesting. Well, I guess we'll come back in, I don't know, 5 years and take a look at this moment in this episode and see if you were right or wrong. And if you were wrong, then we're gonna, I don't know, we're all gonna gang up on you and make fun of you.
Well, I accept, but I'm thinking that 5 years probably isn't long enough. Like, it's going to take a while for all this to happen. So
All right, we'll give you 15 then. Is that a little better?
maybe, I think, yeah, we'll see. What I'm saying is it's so far ahead that it's hard to even think about like what that would mean or what it would look like. But if you asked me again, like, I'm looking at these principles, I'm looking at the patterns of like how we've improved them, and if I had to guess, that's where we would focus our efforts next, or that's the next logical place to kind of improve things, because not a lot has been done in terms of adaptability since back in the Enlightenment era, where we were really starting to play with that. And I guess this seventh stage here, this modern AI, whatever, is starting to focus on that again. But I'm just not sure exactly, again, what that might look like going forward. And if that's really still this stage, maybe it is still this stage. Maybe the stage after it is a whole different situation. Who knows? But
Yeah.
I think most importantly, what's interesting to me about this process is that these 7 principles that we talked about show up in at different stages. I mean, sort of all of them show up a little bit everywhere, but there's each of these stages is emphasizing certain pieces of it. And I think understanding those pieces helps me gain perspective on how knowledge management works, what aspects we should be thinking about, what aspects we should be focusing on, and how we should be interacting with our systems. In other words, if you were to put these into pieces of advice, like it, I'll just give the bullet points, the 7 dwarfs, one more time. Keep it simple, make it accessible, be adaptable, scale efficiently, stay consistent, maintain context, and ensure durability. Like, these are things to me where if you adhere to these principles, regardless of where you are in history, like, all of these are valuable insights. These are all principles that are worth keeping in mind, regardless of where knowledge management goes. I think distilling it down to this is key for me, because it helps me understand. Now we have a good sense of why we care about knowledge management, what it is, and how we apply it.
Absolutely. I don't think there's anything else I could add to that. Is there anything else you want to say before I take us home?
No, I think that's it.
Alrighty, if you guys enjoyed this, you can find more content just like this at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. And until next week, keep being wrong.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag #WrongIdea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.